Blessings and welcome back, everyone, to our third and final decan of Scorpio. I am Elsa, and I'm joined again by Katie Dayton and David Fisher. And you'll have to excuse my voice a little bit today. I've got a little something going on with the throat. So yes, this is the 24th episode in our journey through the zodiacal faces.
The dates are November 11th or 12th until the 20th or 21st.
Awesome. Thank you, darling. So Austin Coppock calls this the crow, which I thought was really interesting because that's another like Saturnine feature that we see along with the death card or the reaper here accompanying the Scorpio decan. And T. Susan Chang calls this mortal beauty, which I think is really beautiful, and we'll kind of get into why that is. The Lord of illusionary success is the Seven of Cups, and we've been kind of following the mid-cup suits as we go, but this is the Venus and Scorpio Cups card. So the mortal beauty, I think, is kind of descriptive because when we've got Venus here in Scorpio, we get like Venus on the dark side. So this kind of like dark beauty or this attraction or desire to like maybe underworld themes or like dark motifs, even like in fashion or just like in essence of being attracted to sort of dark underworldly aesthetics or things like this, music maybe. But you can definitely see this in like portrayed in, aesthetic, like fashion, kind of that, sexy gothic kind of underworld vibe, because we've got still that Mars here kind of pushing through that desire. But when we've got that dark beauty aesthetic, it can be, obviously it can be awesome and beautiful, but I wanted to just take a second to talk about Venus being in detriment in Scorpio. So, just to be explicit, we have Mars ruling all of Scorpio, and this decan, this co-lord is Venus. So Mars and Venus do have this sort of polarity together, this spectrum of being like the quote unquote female or male lover, those kind of like polarities on the night team of the moon. So, they can work together in this nighttime way, but here Mars sort of overtakes Venus. Venus is in her exile or in her detriment here in this decan. So this dark beauty can sometimes be to Venus's detriment. And we're going to see that a little bit in some of the ancient authors. So I wanted to just start out by giving a little trigger warning. We'll let you know when things come up, like as they go. But there is going to be some talk of violence and violence against women, or the R word that rhymes with grape. So we will let you know when we're about to talk about those things. But if that's too heavy, it's going to kind of be mixed in with that mortal beauty and that dark beauty. And a lot of times, because Mars is so strong here and Venus is not and the moon is not, we're going to see some of that violence against women. But you do also see uprisings because we've got Mars as rebellion. So you do find some taking of your power moments. So I don't want to completely, throw Venus under the bus here, but I did just want to, lead with that so that everybody, just a little bit of a content warning to start off.
I think something that's interesting, and we might be getting into this briefly, is that Venus has co-rulership over a decan in every single sign where she feels uncomfortable. She has it in Aries, she has it in Scorpio, and she has it in Virgo. So I feel like it's interesting to think about, and what does that mean symbolically?
I know when I first found that out, or when that first dawned on me or whatever, that Venus doesn't have any she doesn't have any like exaltation decans. Like she's always being thrown into these scenarios where she's being compromised. And I don't know if that says something bigger about, women in general being like thrown into these types of scenarios in male dominated societies and all this stuff, and being sort of like, always being ruled like as a co-lord or a sub-lord to someone who has more power than them or something like this. But I think it's so unfair, and I was so sad when I realized that Venus doesn't have any like exalted decans or any like beautiful places where she rules here. She's always having to deal with challenges in her.
No lordship in Pisces, not in Libra, not in Taurus. It's just a bummer. Yeah.
It's a total bummer. We love you, Venus. And so we're going to see then again the Empress. Just to be explicit again, the Empress is the Venusian card, and we've talked about her plenty of times, and she definitely is going to have her moment of exaltation where we might bring her up in Pisces, and she definitely had her Taurus moments as being like the main lord. But yeah, we're always seeing her as a co-lord, being sort of less empowered. Which I'm really glad you brought that up, Katie. I remember being so sad and kind of bewildered at why, and I still think about that. So yeah, the Venus card is the Empress, and in the Hermetic deck, it's called the Daughter of the Mighty Ones. And then we still, of course, have our Scorpio card, which is the Death card, the Child of the Great Transformers. Okay, so the crow, and it's in this depiction, it's a crow, like kind of eating or holding on to like a little heart, like almost like it has that kind of Three of Swords moment of like the like bleeding heart or something like this. So Austin starts out by saying, on the surface, what occurs in this decan appears as a loss. Love is revealed as an illusion and is a mere matter of selfish projection, yet it's not a loss. For the desire and the capacity for its satisfaction never truly depend on anyone or anything else. To transform disillusionment into satisfaction, though, is a potent operation. To transform the disillusionment into satisfaction is necessary here. The enemies and lovers seen in the second face of Scorpio now part ways. And this alchemical separation of desire from the person or object, which you were formerly sort of desiring or attaching yourself to. And though the lover has gone, this desire remains. So it kind of shows a little bit of like an illusion or like an emptiness where we saw a little bit of the grasping that was happening in Scorpio 1. And we see that here again. But now it's known its object of desire. So I think I hadn't mentioned this yet, but the Lord of Illusionary Success, the Seven of Cups, is also called the Lord of Debauchery in a lot of decks. So this talks a lot about like, you know, confusion and illusion and drunkenness and kind of getting lost in our desires, or having like our desires fall flat or be empty, or our desires being lies in a way, or some kind of a disillusionment of what we thought. So the third face is known union, and now it departs from it. So it's a place of separation and transformation.
Well, I guess we can see a logical, I always mention this, I think, when we get to the end of, well, not always perhaps, but when we get to the end of the signs, I always mention how it feels like we are at the later stages of the previous narratives, right? Whereas in the 5, we had to cope with a loss. We have to immediately face the state of losing something and being stricken, grief-stricken. When you get to the 6, you are in that state of discovering that you have some some source of power that is renewable within yourself. But when you get to the 7th, you kind of got lost in that 6 vibe. You're like, yeah, this is good, but only as a palliative measure. You're not meant to get stuck in your memories. So please get out of the multiplicity and try to focus on something for once in your feelings. You need that. And so here is just like how Venus, because it's in detriment, can also be a problem when you're trying, like in this Martian ground, you're trying to cope with reality, and you are able to see the multiple beautiful facets of everything going around you so you can overcome your grief. but focusing on that which really matters, and not only in what is meant to drown your grief, is the hard part here, I suppose.
It's corrupted beauty because of the fact that it's like Venus is creating, right? And like in a feminine way, we sort of like vision the world that we want, and then we sort of make our way towards that ideal as a vision. And here the vision is like a fantasy or an illusion that you get lost in. So you could imagine like the loss of a job or the loss of a relationship, and sort of always chasing that feeling, or pedestalizing a feeling or something like this, and never really getting towards it. Or like, you know, people talk about like chasing a high, right? Or like
which again, it's the overwhelm of what you were supposed to do in the 6. Try to fire up that energy again, but then you get like it firing over and over again, like an addictive pattern, and then you hallucinate. Your perception of reality is altered, and your dreams, your idealizations, they come to life, but in this illusionary way that can be harmful to you.
Well, I think about like the idea of like quote unquote chasing the dragon too, where it's like you're always looking for that new high, or like sometimes you're always looking for that love that's going to satisfy you, or that sexual partner that's going to satisfy you, and it keeps falling flat. Or even more, you could get into spite here, where you had something that you thought was good, and then you're kind of like doing things out of like the spiteful memory of that thing, right? So like drinking your cares away, or, you know, partying your cares away, or, you know, violence and sex, just to kind of be like, you know, I had this thing, but fuck it, you know, like that kind of like YOLO like energy can be strong here, of just like looking, or forced satisfaction kind of a situation, where it's like it's not really satisfying to you, which is the Venus debility here, which is like, you know, you're looking for love and satisfaction and harmony, and you're trying to like force it, like by many partners or many drugs or whatever, you know, lots of food, or like whatever it is, you're trying to get back to that place where you can feel connection, or this idea in your mind of harmony. So in this idea in your mind of connection, and that's where it's like the illusionary success. I think that's where that 7 comes in, of like certain things about that ideal are corrupted. The card in the little white book talks about like victory, but it's actually a lie, right? So that kind of dichotomy. And then Agrippa, and we'll get to this with the Picatrix. We could actually probably just do the Picatrix next, but Agrippa goes on to say things like drunkenness, fornication, wrath, violence, and strife. So we see Mars sort of overtaking Venus here. And then he goes on to say like forced satisfaction, which wouldn't occur naturally. So it's the ultimate phase of wrestling with one's own desired nature on this like deeper level of like really not getting what you want. Like before, like you're going after what you want in Decan 1, and Decan 2, you get the opportunity to maybe experience with the other your own desire nature. And then here, when it's all stripped away, you still have that grasping, but you're sort of forced to reckon with it, and where it is in your own reality. So Austin says it's the matter of transformation of desire that has to do with like either immediate gratification or like sense objects. So desire rebels and tries to dominate the person in which it resides. So I think that's interesting, because Mars is like the dominant force, but it's like using Venus, I guess, as a co-ruler to sort of chase its desires or get what it wants, but it's unfulfilling to that being, to the real truth of it, Venus being truth. Austin goes on to say that this debauchery is not the proper formula for this face, but rebellion against it. So to sort of work with this face is to sort of, you know, fight the demons or whatever, like work towards your better nature or something like this. He says, we bury the corpse of past loves and wait for flowers to bloom on their graves. Desire's hungry ghosts have been finally laid to rest. And in the grave soil of yesterday's love, anything can grow. So ultimately, this face is a formula of liberation. For if we're not capable of allowing our desires to rest, we could be enchained forever, prisoners of what we once held dear. So although this, we're going to talk a lot about like heartbreaking, violent images in this space, it's ultimately one of liberation and can be one of great satisfaction. If one chases the ghosts which flit about, there will not be but debauchery. However, if one releases what you no longer possess, what returns is satisfaction superior to anything previously dreamt. And I think it's interesting that he says even previously dreamt, right? Because the Seven of Cups has a lot to do with that dreaming and fantasy. And a lot of times what happens in reality, whether it's an illusion or whether it's like a solid image that we have set our sights towards, it's the reality is always different than the dream that we had in our minds. So I think it's really interesting to kind of think about this internal landscape of the dreamer and of the vision, and how the vision is always a little bit corrupted in our own minds compared to what we get in real life. No matter whether that's a corrupted vision that we're aiming for, or like we get the object of our desire at the end, a lot of times it's, it just doesn't, it's just not the exact same as it is in our minds, I guess.
I suppose a healthy sense where this would manifest is the person knows, again, when to let go of things that they love, that they see that are not working anymore, that they see that the elements that inspired love are gone, and then they are able to feel those elements moving elsewhere ahead in their life, and they follow it to follow the inspiration for their heart. But the negative, that would be the positive manifestation of the Seven of Cups, you realizing that you don't have your heart set in the right place because it's just moved elsewhere. But yeah, when having the negative side of it come up, I would suppose at a lower polarity, is just trying to revive that feeling that was lost in the same way that you had it before. And then you kind of, again, get lost in that vampirism kind of energy where you try to take from earth and from circumstance and from the material realm everything that you can. You take on your body, you take on the pleasures of, the life, food, the body, and everything.
It's interesting that you mentioned vampire because KD, you probably were about to say the same thing that I was.
Yes.
Susan Chang refers to this as a vampire because when she, she's the one that taught me how to use like pins, like stick pins for the swords. If you're going to do if you want to propitiate some magic, like if you get swords and you want to sort of make your offering to the gods, you can use little stick pins instead to try to have the 10 of swords not hit you or something like this. But she talks about a vampire or a hollow needle or a tattoo needle or things like that, right? Where it's like your nourishment is literally coming from blood or something like this, right?
Yeah, the fangs being like the Mars piercing, but also that blood, in that it just kind of goes round and round and round in our body, is pretty similar to that fixed water element. It doesn't move or really flow anywhere outside of us. Beautiful on multiple different
levels. That's weird to think.
Well, he was saying the best of and the worst of, and I just wanted to throw in here that as I told these guys before we started recording, this is probably my most frequently drawn card on a daily basis of all the cards, and I don't think that it means that I'm a delusional asshole, but could be. A lot of times it can be being deceived by something. It really resonated with me what you said though, David, about reassessing if you have your heart set on the right things and not being sure which thing to place your heart on. But on the positive side, I do want to note that this card, Chang also notes this in her chapter, that it's called like the card of the artist, because it is in fact that sort of imagination and illusion that is needed to operate as a muse when you're creating a beautiful piece of artwork.
Yeah, because we're still in that creative Venus force. It's just somehow defiled or somehow betrayed or somehow corrupted, or it's somehow lingering on the dark side, and that doesn't have to be a bad thing, right? Like where it's Venus here, where her creativity is willing to go into the underworld. It's just if you get trapped there, right? Like Austin was saying, it's a place where we can like find creative liberation. We can completely free ourselves from the desire cycle, which the desire cycle is nothing but samsara, right? So it's just looking at like, and I think this goes for all of Scorpio, all the decans, about like using that Mars cutting energy to cut out toxic things in your life, like cut out the illusion if possible. Yeah, and here we see that Venus, and David and I were talking because I wanted to make sure that I was right when I said this, but the Me Too movement was really popped off during a Venus in Scorpio moment. So you can see that, you know, reflection in just women being fallen under the prey of maybe violent or powerful men and just fighting back, right? Like liberating ourselves, telling the stories no matter how old. And that can be something too, like when she talks about like, you know, we're chasing the desires that we had that we actually got in the middle with the sun, right? We actually got to see our desires, right? We actually got to explore with the other. We actually got tantric union, and then it's taken away, right? So the idea of like chasing something from the past, so it's like, no matter how long ago someone might have been done wrong or brutalized in some way, you know, there's always that time to sort of rise up, no matter how weak you feel or overpowered you feel. So, you know, there's basically what I'm saying is there's never a bad time to cut toxic energy out of your life, even if it's been way too long or you've lived in an illusion for way too long. So I think there's a little bit of hope in that way, that we still can use that Venusian creativity to sort of plunge into our underworld and use that like sword. Like when I think of Mars, I think of a sword, and when I think of Venus, I think of truth. So you have that sort of truth where you can just sort of like eventually cut away the addictions and cut away the unhealthy desires, because the desire principle itself isn't a bad one, right? It's just when we're sort of corrupting it. So
Okay, so I was gonna say spoiler alert, but that's not the thing.
That's
What
not the
is
right
it?
thing. Trigger warning.
Yeah, trigger alert. Trigger warning. There arises in the third phase of Scorpio a horse and a rabbit. This is a phase of evil works and flavors. And trigger warning, forcing sex upon unwilling women. This is its for.
And I think here, I mean, the horse and the rabbit, I mean, rabbit is a sign of fertility, right? And horse is a sign of like unbridled power. And we have like Mars being that R word in a lot of ancient texts, and, you know, Venus not wanting to succumb to like some crazy violent interaction because Venus here is purity in her ultimate form. So you sort of have to kidnap Venus and drag her into the underworld in order to get that desire fulfilled, because she's not going to fulfill some debaucherous desire willingly, you know?
But again, this is a phase that is most associated, and especially in magical work, apparently, from this, with depravity, or how do you say it? Perversity, but when you pervert beauty in a way, when you pervert things that are meant to be delicate, protected, fragile, and what?
It's like corrupting.
Yeah, corrupting. Yes.
Yeah, and perverting like the image, you know, just like definitely corrupting and perverting the image. Sorry,
but also
Dave.
perverting. Yeah, it's corrupting, but also perverting, like making it like Persephone was perverted by Hades. Also, and
Really important myth. You should tell that myth, David.
Oh, so you have Persephone as being Demeter's daughter. Demeter being the goddess of the seasons for the ancient Greeks. Persephone was her daughter, who was taken hostage, was kidnapped by the lord of the underworld, Hades, and taken into the underworld. So Demeter asked Zeus for help, and they went to save Persephone into the underworld to save Persephone. But when they tried to get her out, they couldn't, because she had eaten from the pomegranates or the pomegranate seeds from the underworld. And so when you eat from the food of the underworld, you're not allowed to come out.
Which is
You become
another, I
part
just
of it.
wanted to add, which is another sort of like trick or illusion. Like she didn't know that if she ate these seeds, you know, these red forbidden,
Restricted.
you know, like she didn't know that it was a part of this like illusion or this trick that happens in the seven. Yeah.
And when after she was tricked into eating that and became permanently attached to that place, Demeter was so furious that she was like, no, until I get my daughter back, no one's getting summer, no one's getting warmth, no one's getting spring, fuck y'all. And so she's like freezing.
And no one's getting food, so it
No one's
messes up
getting
the
food,
crop.
most
So
importantly.
Yes, no one's getting food. So again, that idea of like stripping away nutrition and like forced starvation or something.
And so this is why winter. And then Persephone, then they make these deal where Persephone spends half the year above ground with Demeter, which is where you get spring and summer, and she spends the rest of the year in the underworld with Hades, fulfilling that need to be there, which is where we get autumn and winter. And that's Persephone going into the underworld for you. Also very similar to other mythical tales that you have, other stories that you have around other religions from the ancient times. So one thing I was going to say about that being linked to the Empress and death is that you really have to know your own desires, and you have to take a chance to really go deep to figure what they really are. But once you've bitten that fruit, that forbidden fruit of knowledge, to know yourself, to begin knowing yourself, you lose innocence, and you lose a kind of connection to innocence and divinity when you lose that innocence. And so you lose connection to beauty, to the one, which is the beautiful, the one that moves your soul towards it in every single way, because it's the most perfect. And if you don't get exactly what I'm saying, that's okay. It's a lot of stuff. But what I mean to say is, by getting to know your desires, you sometimes get this side of them, which is they're not always there to help you. They're not always being used by your higher spirits. And I think that the Seven of Cups really brings us to face this particular challenge of understanding when our desires are not working in our best interest, which is something very counterintuitive to understand.
You mentioned other myths as well. Like, it just sounds like the Garden of Eden. Some of the terminology you used, whether it's desire or the knowledge of your desires being the apple and the snake, and partaking of that apple means your downfall. So
Yeah, no,
yeah, this trickery of eating happens again, right? They're both red fruits, which are very like Martian and sort of sensual. But the pomegranate and the apple are both, you know.
Well,
like,
actually, the Bible never mentions the redness of the fruit, but we do subconsciously, I think, culturally, kind of project that image because of perhaps the pomegranate as well.
But I wanted to say something about the nature of desire, about how like we see that our desires are not always for our best interest or whatever. And then we'd have like Venus being sort of kidnapped into the underworld or whatever. And it's like, sometimes we have to be forced to look at our shit, or something has to have, you know what I'm saying? Like, something has to show us that the nature of that desire is not for our best interest. Like, and when you were talking about like the knowledge, right? Eating from the tree of knowledge is what gives us that, or something like this, like eating a fruit from the tree of knowledge. So it's like, sometimes, you know, and I'm not saying, this might sound triggering, I'm not trying to say we have to be like kidnapped or, you know, something like this. I'm just saying, we have to sometimes be forced to look at the dark side. And I think where Venus, that dark beauty, comes in here is like when we willingly take the plunge to look at like half, you were saying half the year is in Hades, half the year is above ground, right? Like there's half of our desires that are probably of our better nature, and then half of our desires that are not. And there's an illusion sometimes surrounding that, or like a wisdom or a knowledge that you sort of have to face whether you want to or not. And it sort of has to come sometimes in this Martian way of like capturing you and being like, whoa, like that is not it or whatever. But you don't always know. You're in this like illusion of the Seven of Cups of like your own desires and fantasies, like which ones are of your better nature, and you know, just dealing with that idea of light and dark again, that shadow, sun, death.
Building on what you're saying, Demeter, I keep saying Demeter, the idea that she is the goddess of the seasons, and how she ideally wants to keep everything warm and cozy throughout the year, but she can't, because the reason for her delight, for her inspiration of spirit, is taken from her. So whenever her inspiration is taken by Hades, she freezes the earth. She's not abundant, so she faces that cycle of death. And so what I'm thinking is, we really need to face the fact that our desires here on earth, they are bound to produce fruits that are pleasant and fulfilling for a while, but then they will wither and die. And we have to prepare for the whole cycle from the go. We cannot just look at and this is the lesson of the Seven of Cups, we cannot just look at our desires as if they were the end goal of anything, as if they were more than the inspiration, you know, for our spirits to keep moving forward, because that's what they are at the end, just the inspiration. They're not the end goal, because you'll never get to an end goal here. You'll never get to the end of the journey unless you're dead. And so
even,
I think
yes, exactly, the death card, it's like even the best of desire is bound to mortality, right? Mortal beauty, and it's fleeting.
And nothing teaches us that more than aging. I was going to say olding. Yeah. And so we see our own beauty withering. We see our own tightness of the body kind of fading away, and our bones becoming brittle, our firmness, you know, just becoming wobbly, and we become flaccid and all of that with age, and our voices become weak, our spirits also. And I think that we should look at everything in our lives that inspire our souls as, you know, this is going to fade with time or change with time, and I need to adapt my soul to that in order to be attracted to those things that are, you know, of higher nature, more everlasting within these circumstances that are so.
Absolutely. And I think that's the forced looking at the shadow side or whatever it is of like, and if you think of Venus as like truth and beauty, you are forced to reconcile with that. Like you think of like the Wicked Witch, right? Where it's just like, you look in the mirror and you see like all the wrinkles and you don't want them there. So you're making deals with the devil to, you know, deals with death in order to like not have that beauty fade or something like this. And that's, that's because we're not willing to just reconcile with the fact that that happens and these desires are fleeting. One of my teachers, someone had asked them about like manifestation or desire or something like this, or why we have to wait to get to our goals or our manifestations or something like this. And he was like, well, actually, you should be grateful, or it's like it's a moment of gratitude, because imagine if you got everything that you wanted when you were 16, like your deepest, like just clutching desires, like I must have it or whatever, when you're 16 years old. Now 10 years later or whatever, is that really the thing? No, it's a blessing you didn't get what you want when you were coveting and desiring and praying for it at the time, right? And you can do that, you know, you can say, imagine if I got everything I wanted in my 20s, or imagine if I got, you know, you can do that over and over again. Imagine if I got this person or this job that I thought that I wanted. And then in hindsight being like, oh my God, that was a huge blessing, right? So that is the fleeting nature of desire, and what we sort of have to peel our eyes open for, you know, like it's not going to happen naturally for you to have to face that shadow side. And I mean, in the sun decan, we get illuminated to this, the Scorpio II decan, the last decan, we get illuminated because we have this luminary coming in. But here it's sort of the, you know, the hard part of like having to let it go, or having to watch the beauty fade, and reconciling with how we actually deal with that. So
I keep thinking about like, yeah, we are in the desert, and we found this one pool of water, and that is really rare, and that is just here because yesterday there was this once in every 100-year rain cloud that passed by, and we're lucky enough that we got to drink water for 2 days in the middle of the Sahara. But now we have to keep moving in that direction because we need to get to the nearest town. If this pool weren't here, we would be dead halfway. But now we get enough energy to keep going and arrive to our destination. But imagine if you get stuck in the idea that the pool was your salvation, and that you're like, oh, I cannot leave this spot because another rain cloud might come and might, you know, drop more water, and then I won't have to face the whole journey to the other side again. That's how I feel like the sun decan in the middle of Scorpio could be the little pool of water where you get like, oh, okay, I can breathe again a little bit, but it's still amidst that battleground of Mars.
And it's rearranging like terrible priorities. Like we all know it's hard to cut off an addiction, and it's hard to, like, within society, like face aging, right? So a lot of times, you know, even as women, I'm just saying this because Venus is in her fall, we don't look at ourselves with, you know, let's say in a 70-year-old body. Blessings to all my crones out there. I'm not putting any projections on you, but like as a society, instead of looking down at our aged hands that are wrinkled in something and being like, you know, giving so much gratitude for your life and for your body and everywhere you've been in the journey thus far, we turn self-hatred onto our body. We're not beautiful enough. We're not young enough. And this is like something that really hits at the heart of what it is to be a woman in modern society, you know? So those shadows are something that we have to face, of like where true beauty comes from in this way, and like where true, you know, I guess where our power and where our voice as women comes from as well. And, you know, another kind of triggering topic when it comes to like body and body image, and I guess maybe someone far away from their home, let's say, I've seen, you know, just, I guess Venus in her fall, I'm not specifically saying like this decan, but like a Venus in Scorpio thing also can be like dark arts and like sex work and things like that. So I don't want to bring shame or shade on some of these darker like themes, because it's something that a lot of people experience, right? And so things like exploring our sexuality, things like sex work, you know, and things like this will often come up for these Venus and Scorpio themes, or people that have had to deal with like their bodies being used in inappropriate ways or against their will in any kind of a fashion, men and women, right? So you might feel that, or you might end up having scenarios or nativities that have some of that work of like having to bring these kind of whatever you want to call it, lower realm things up to the surface, like, you know, working with addiction, working with sex, all those kind of like things that we'd rather not face and are sort of hard to wrap our minds around, like how to use them properly and how to empower ourselves through them and what that means for the individual, and taboos as well, like societal taboos on people that are R-worded, or people that are in the sex industry, or people, especially women or queer folk, that use their body freely and liberate their body and liberate their sexuality, and the way that they're sort of put down in society and things like that. So I think that would be like on one polarity an empowerment that we could find here, or some type of theme that you could deal with if you got a Venus in Scorpio play happening. Okay, should we move on to the tarot?
Yeah, sure. Let me share my screen. Okay, I have a few depictions here of death. This is the card for all of Scorpio, all 3 decans in Scorpio. And we've seen a number of death depictions before, so we recognize figures like the skeleton. But there are a couple of things that I want to draw your attention to on the second card from the left, which is the Scapini deck. It's a favorite of mine and Elsa's. And I think that we definitely have been in touch with the transformative nature of death. But there's also almost, I don't know quite how to put it, a celebratory nature of death. And what we have here in this card from the second from the left is a figure who is dancing with a snake. The dance actually looks sort of similar like to the dance of Shiva with the transformation and destruction. But also the snake itself is a sign of Scorpio. So I thought it was very interesting to have that dancing on water or ice, another sign of Scorpio. And all these people at the bottom littering the floor of the card. It kind of reiterates something, again, that we've touched on in the last 2 decans as well, but that nothing really matters in the face of death. So the skeleton is dancing on top of these people who maybe at one time were beautiful, maybe wealthy, maybe had a lot of power, but it doesn't matter in the face of death. Everybody is kind of at the same level. They're drowning in death.
Yeah, and the depiction, I just on that card, before we move on from that card, is like that snake almost looks like a spine. And when we're talking about the dancing Shiva, Shiva Nataraj or Shiva Nataraja, it's how the universe is created and destroyed. And the people littering the ground sort of remind me of that grasping that we see of like, you can't take anything with you, and the idea of like moving into the underworld and sort of trying to, use whatever we can to grasp our way out. And what I thought was really interesting, and what I think is cool doing this decan journey with you all, is certain decks have like certain depictions that remind me of certain decans. So here we see the crow, which is Decan 3, which I think is really cool that they put the crow in there. So, in each card that you're bringing up, we see like different bits that kind of give little homage to like different parts of the sign or something like this. So, yeah.
And we don't show every single iteration of death that we have on the very first decan of Scorpio, because some of them just feel more relevant to different decans, which is definitely the case for me, at least on the far right, the image of the kind of girl as death. It's a very, it's supposed to be a very pretty girl, but she has a scythe and she's in a constrained piece of clothing that's, high collared, completely covered for the most part. Almost a Victorian style variation of clothing, which was a really restricted time. And for all I know, she could be a vampire. Bringing it back around to the idea of vampirism in this decan.
Yeah, and just like almost like she should be like, quote unquote should, whatever, but just be like young or beautiful or unencumbered, but instead she's clad in black and wearing this heavy garment of Saturn, and just this kind of idea of Venus, or this dark beauty, essentially. Yeah. Like this kind of underworldly beauty that we see as the muse here.
We could call her vampire Persephone. But then I also wanted to bring up the second from the right card is it's a figure of Pieta, which is a classical rendering of the Virgin Mary with Jesus. And I think it's a pretty interesting choice to have that for the death card. But it's much less, it's very much more infleshed than a lot of the other death cards that we've seen. Again, reminds me a little bit of a more Venusian side of the Scorpio sign. So
Absolutely. And in a way, nuns kind of still remind me of that dark beauty of Venus. Even maybe it's not on the side of like, I'm, you know, a liberated sex worker, you know, maybe it's on the side of like austerity or something like this with the nuns and clad in black and quiet and constantly looking within and sort of like removed from the world and remove themselves from the muse of beauty in a way, right? Like they take themselves out of the beauty of the classical youth and beauty paradigm. And it is interesting with like Jesus, right? When you say enfleshed, because we know that when we're talking about the death card, we're talking about the child, right? Of God, the Son of God. The child of the great transformers. So it's like through death, we've, you know, in this case with Jesus, you know, it's not real death, right? There's this, you know, second coming. There's this life beyond the grave type of analogy. So, yeah.
Yeah, and actually, that's a really good point. Before I move on to the Empress cards, I did want to mention that T. Susan Chang, in her chapter on this in 36 Secrets, considers whether the Seven of Cups might be, you know, like denying death its due. Now that is in relation to the discussion about it being kind of vampiric and, you know, like sucking off the life or whatever. But I also see that possibly in stories of myth and supernatural. Sorry if anybody believes it literally, the story of Virgin Mary and Jesus, where like, and everybody else in the era, where he didn't actually die. Death was denied in that case because he was a deity. So fine, fair enough, but there's still a story there about death not getting its due.
Yeah, and Shiva Nataraj dances in a ring of fire, fire being Mars, and Shiva's the Lord of Death, and so is the Reaper, right? And it's like, again, going willingly into the arms or like denying death somehow is this idea of like denying the shadow side instead of just letting us give ourselves over to the Reaper because it's this sort of like cyclical nature. But denying death its due is kind of really interesting because a lot of us do that. We deny crone, we deny death, we deny shadow. We're not willing to look.
That's why it scares us. That's why it scares us, is because we deny it.
And we're not willing to go, and like no one, again, I've said it so many times, it's probably since Virgo 3, but like no one wants to die and no one wants to release their friends and family to death either, you know, like we don't willingly go to the shadow side. We don't willingly take the hand of death or something like this, right? So the idea of allowing death or giving death some due in that cycle of rebirth, in that cosmic dance, I guess we could say.
Honestly, I can think of some people in my family that I would gladly give their hands in marriage to death.
So sort of sweet. Oh,
it really is. You know?
I can think about a few relationships that I would, you know, let go.
Quite easily, as a matter of fact. Lovingly.
Okay, now we're going to move on to the card of Venus as the co-ruler of this decan, and that's the Empress. And we've seen the Empress before, but just as a reminder, the Rider-Waite-Smith depiction is on the left. And on the right, we have a card that I just feel like is very appropriate for Venus and Scorpio. It's the Michael Ulrich deck. And you can so clearly see the similarities and the inspiration in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, but with these bones and the skull and everything correlated, it just doesn't, it speaks to me of death specifically. So it's interesting having these two combined because the Empress is normally associated with fertility, but then we have the skeletal remains of the Empress.
The Empress as the Reaper. Appreciating this card is exactly kind of the theme of this deck, right? Which is appreciating this sort of art, this sort of depiction, you know?
Yes, absolutely. What I wanted to do is talk about the Empress and the three signs of her being uncomfortable, her detriment and fall. We talked about that at the beginning, that Venus tends to be the co-lord in decans of signs where Scorpio, Virgo, and Aries, for instance, where she's totally uncomfortable. And I wanted to read from T. Susan Chang's chapter on this decan, what she says about the difference between Venus ruled decans and the difference that makes to the Empress. So in Venus fallen in Virgo, which is what I have depicted in the far left in the Scapini card, we have a meticulous and perfectionist. She polishes her creations to a glossy shine and exults in their beauty, though sometimes she wishes she had someone to share it with. Of Venus and Aries, so this is the decan associated with the Four of Wands, and she is debilitated in Aries. She brings respite in stressful times and grace to the uniting of the Lord and Lady, though the blessings are temporary. It's the wedding, not the marriage. And in this depiction of the Empress from the Botticelli deck, I like to think of the armor she's wearing, definitely indicating that she's a warrior, as well as sort of the regalia around her and the gold plating. It's kind of like, it's the coronation, it's not your whole reign, you know, that sort of thing with the Empress and specifically Venus and Aries. And then finally, on the far right, we have Venus and Scorpio also in detriment or debility. And we say the Seven of Cups here, and it's Venus is magnetic and covered in glamour. She works a magic of images that is entrancing, fascinating, and at times downright dangerous. So it's a slightly creepier iteration of the Empress that we have here for Venus and Scorpio. So this is an interesting way to view the differences between Venus and Virgo with the angel wings, the perfectionist, Venus and Aries with the armor and the gilding and gold, as well as in Scorpio with the creepiness, but beauty, dark beauty. Okay, and now we get to the Seven of Cups, which again, this is one of the cards that I pull all the time. So I'm very familiar with this card. In fact, I thought about getting a tattoo at one point of the Seven of Cups with a planet in each one of the cups, because I'm obsessed with astrology and tarot. So, so we have here a card that in traditional literature, the white book with most tarot card decks that you'll get, the Seven of Cups is obsessive. There's an element of addiction, escapism, and substance abuse. There is a lot of illusion and imagination. You could see this shadowy figure that's standing in front of the cups, which, by the way, this is a very unique silhouette, a very unique perspective on a person across the whole Rider-Waite-Smith deck. This is one that's shrouded in shadow from behind. This is a person who literally wants every single cup but can't have it. So anyway, it's something to keep in mind as we look at some of these other tarot cards too, that the figure at the center is usually the focal point of the person who can't make the choice. You can see that there are often sort of dreamy references. It's a little bit euphemistic almost with the fantasy. There's some kind of shiny things in there that make it seem very appealing, but that's not true consistently across decks. In the middle, we have a depiction of the Seven of Cups of a figure in a mask holding a skull, death, and there is a dragon at his feet. It reminds me so much of what you said earlier in the recording, Elsa, of the desire to like chase dragons. It's just that sort of unfulfilling, constant pursuit of something that's maybe not necessarily good for you. So
I
that
remember
middle
having this
card is a
conversation.
decidedly negative depiction. What was that?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
So it's funny that we have now the North Node in Taurus, the Venusian sign as well, as we were talking about this, which is the North Node is associated with obsession and with instability.
And insatiable hunger as well.
Insatiable.
And KD, you said that last time. And what I think is interesting, like we needed to pre-record this a little bit. So we actually, I don't know if it still will be, I haven't looked, but if Venus is currently in Scorpio as well. And then we just had those Scorpio eclipses. So it's all kind of, you know, it's all happening.
Yeah, I don't think Venus goes into Sagittarius until like the end of the month when we're already in Sag season. So it
Yeah,
might be.
so we
It
still will
cannot
have
come
it.
fast enough.
Well,
Venus.
then we still luckily will have the Venus in Scorpio signature happening when you all receive this.
So I want to talk about the card on the far right again, the Scapini deck. Elsa, the more I know about this one too, the more I'm loving it, and I'm so glad that you have the same kind of affectionate feelings towards this card, because they're so unique, the depictions, and they say something else. You know,
they're so detailed. And what's funny, why I have such an affection for this is I haven't mentioned this in a while, but this was my very first tarot deck. And I know I was like 12 years old, and I think it's really crazy that I was like so deep. It's such a complex deck, like, and I'm still using it and finding these like complex like significations and how unique it is in the tarot world in general. And the fact that I was just so on the level, like with that, like at that age, and like, so anyways, it's just been with me almost my entire life. And I do have such an affection for this deck, and it is so rich.
It is. Well, and specifically rich in the sense that it's not every deck that has a detailed scene for every minor arcana card. You know, a lot of times they'll just throw up however many number of items of the suit, and
like the pips are in the Hermetic deck. We just get like some beautiful art, but we just get, the 7 cups.
Which deck did you have, Elsa, since you were 12?
This Scapini deck.
Scapini deck on the far right.
It's still near and dear to my heart, and it just, it has kind of a special just vibe to it, and this one's cool because but I don't want to say something before you're going to say it, but in the way this hookah that's kind of like dripping into the other cup kind of reminds me of Austin's like mutual distillation kind of vibe.
Oh, that's a really good point. I didn't even think about that. But I particularly like this one because the figure that mimics the kind of shadowy figure in Rider-Waite-Smith is a very Venusian looking woman. And there is a part of this that has to do with like aging. And this is something that Austin brings up a lot in his text. T. Susan Chang brings up a lot in her text, is the idea of the 7 of Cups being clinging to glamour whose time has passed. It's the same way in which you could consider denying death its due, but the glamour piece really speaks to this sort of card to me.
Yeah, the glamour and the charm, and like the Wicked Witch that looks into the mirror, and like, you see the like all these depictions of like women that are actually old and like hags, but then they drink this thing and like it's revealed their actual image is like 1,000 years old and stuff. It's like cheating death in this way. Yes. Or you see like even Madonna, who's a queen to us, has sort of fallen out of favor because she's just like on TikTok doing all these faces with all this Botox and all these shots, and it's just looking so alien and just kind of so out of touch.
Yep.
And I think sleeping and dreaming here, like, or even like, taking, a pill that just helps you fall asleep easy, or like, dozing off in intoxication, or, something like this is really apropos.
There is the tale of Hansel and Gretel.
Oh, yes. The witch who eats the young kids.
The witch is an archetype of what you were saying, Elsa. She eats them to keep young. She attracts them with Venusian things, which end up being deceitful, obviously.
Yeah,
I always eat baby cucumbers, baby carrots, baby corn, because it keeps me young.
Oh, nice one. I like this, KD. I like this remedy. So let's hear a little bit more about what they've got going on in this 7 of Cups, because there's always some cool
yeah, for sure. There's a couple of things happening that are interesting about what this figure might be dreaming about, and it does put it into context, I think, with like the human experience of life. She is dreaming here. There's like a little dream bubble of a cup that is in some cultures, I believe this is actually like a traditional wedding cup of like figures kind of holding hands, like 2 human figures holding hands, and there's like tradition associated with it, that when you've been together for a long time, you have celebrations and drink out of this cup. But in addition, on either side of that, there are what we could consider to be the things that she is abusing or using to put her into this dream state of imagining a cup that represents unity and harmony, potentially through the course of marriage or relationship. We have the hookah looking item, and then we also have what looks like something being distilled in a liquor bottle. It's neither one looks particularly good for the person. But as we go down a little bit more, we kind of get into a silver versus gold dichotomy, and then a body versus spirit dichotomy. So at the very bottom, we have the body being represented by, I think this woman may be a little bit older than she is in the center of the card, but then the spirit being represented by the clouds, the cloud card, the cloud cup, excuse me, is also really interesting. These things kind of like feed and pour down into one another. And it's all happening, it seems like, in this woman's brain as she's dreaming. Venus at her very worst, as a reminder and something to kind of look out for in each of these cups. Venus at her worst, especially in Scorpio, so I'm adding an additional Scorpio layer to this. She can be desperate, self-destructive, ineffective at trying to beguile or charm people, prone to things like embarrassing one-night stands, hangovers. Cosmetic surgery is absolutely a Venus and Scorpio thing. Being cut up.
And botched cosmetic surgery, like things
Yeah.
where the boobs look a little too fake or the
Yeah.
lips are a little too plump or something
Yeah,
like
don't get cosmetic surgery when Venus is in Scorpio.
that's
y'all.
why that's
Don't
kind
do
of
it.
why I mentioned it, is you want
Don't
to
do it.
if you are going to go the route of cheating death a little bit, you want to elect for that. Hit us up.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is true, and it can be kind of like a tattooed, leather clad, kind of like cleavage, short, like I think of like a short skirt and combat boots or something, you know, just like very again, just like a little bit on the dark side or a little bit taboo as far as like fashion goes or something like that. And then, you know, again, plastic surgery or dyeing your hair, wearing a lot of makeup, things like this. And we're not saying those are bad things at all, but it's just the aesthetic of that kind of aesthetic. Yeah.
But I don't want to get away without referencing both the Science and the Mother Peace deck, because we love these decks, and since each minor arcana card that we bring up is specific to the Decan, I want to make sure to always address these because both of these decks have such rich symbolism. In the Mother Peace version of this card, we have 6 cups surrounding a woman in the center with the seventh cup right behind her, and there's a dove on top of it, which is super significant because the dove is the bird of Venus or Aphrodite. And so this card is specifically calling to that like archetype, that female feminine archetype of the goddess of love. And it really is one of those that has almost a more like euphemistic view of the 7 of Cups, in that it is like filling up your creative coffers to be able to something beautiful springing forth from your subconscious, essentially, is what this card is talking about, which again, very positive. But
yeah, and the dove is a symbol of hope, and it's like, if you can channel this, like we said, if you're willing to look at the shadow side and delve into the dark side of, like, I think of like Bjork or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Where you're just like really going into your authenticity, you're really kind of like breaking the mold, you're allowing it to come up into your higher consciousness, you're not afraid to look at death. And it's almost like the spider or something, because I see this woman, she's got this loom or this net, right? And her skirt is woven. And it's like, if you can bring that higher consciousness, that sort of subconscious, which we see in the ocean behind her as well, and the dove of hope, it can sort of like fill our creative cup, where our desires do become like more, at least if illusionary, at least more authentic to our vision or something like this, right? So
well,
yeah,
also, did you know that Bjork was born during this Decan?
I did not, but she must be
Good
our,
call.
you know, that she's a perfect nativity. I thought of her right away for
Yes.
for this kind of
Yes.
archetype, right?
Yes.
Hey, check out
Hey,
Bjork's
good
new
job.
album. We'll link it below.
Please do.
Okay, and then on the right, we have the science deck, which always has a really enlightening and interesting link to some sort of scientific theory or concept. So what this card, it says choices, and it's kind of about how we make choices. Clearly, there are things like logic and reason, but there is also something on the subconscious level that's kind of like an instinct, right? And in this card, we see predator and prey, a lion and a gazelle, and then their families or groups behind them running around chasing the lions, chasing the gazelles and everything. And it's like they're at a moment of meeting. They're at a moment of meeting, and it really depends on the instincts and reactions of both of those animals to dictate what's going to happen next. So essentially, this is a slightly different take on the card that I always found kind of reassuring when I was pulling it a lot from this deck, which is that it is an impetus to make a decision based on going with the gut, and to consider how cluttered your consciousness can be, and that it might be better sometimes to rely on the subconscious in order to make those split-second choices that are going to have a serious impact on you. Also, this is Mount Kilimanjaro in the background. I have a friend that was living in Tanzania at the time, so I really loved it.
Shout out to Tanzanite as well. Tanzanite seems like it would be a really good crystal for this Decan. Also like illuminating that third eye so that you do have the ability to sort of make instinctual, intuitive, like clear instinctual and intuitive navigation through the subconscious, because I do think of this very much as choices when you're faced with all of those 7 cups, but the idea of the fact that you're just too lost in the fog to really know which one to choose or whatever. It's like it's too much mind, it's too many choices. And the idea of like purification so that you understand your instinct, because so often we don't listen to our intuition and we don't listen to our instinct, and we sort of reason and we sort of cope. And if you're, you know, doing things like sex, drugs, rock and roll, whatever you're doing to sort of cope with those things, you're not going to be able to get those clear life-saving, you know, moments of choice where you're just really running on instinct.
Yes,
I really like that here. And I like the sun and the moon as well, with like the fallen moon that we talked about and the sun ruling the last decan, and just the idea of bringing light to those choices or those subconscious places.
and both of those, I mean, the sun especially has to do with selection, right? So selecting a choice, but the moon is the feeling side. The moon is the side that doesn't necessarily want to choose just one. And that's what we see in the other 7 of Cups cards.
Yeah, and that's what we're forced to reckon with here, is like, what's a good choice? What's just a fantasy? What's, you know, and again, you have to go into the dark side. You have to go into that lunar multiplicity. You have to be willing to go there in order to select something and move forward. Before we head out, I can't believe I haven't brought this deck in. And the reason why I haven't is I've been using it and it's been occupied in my sacred space, but I wanted to bring this up. It's one of my favorite decks to use for this season, and I think I'll be using it through Capricorn season at least. Is the Santa Muerte tarot. I know the lighting is really, really bad in here, but I don't think it's that expensive of a deck, and I really, really love the little white book, and I love the depictions here. So I was just going to do like a little honorary. I didn't have the foresight to be able to send these to KD for some good looks. But the death card here, and all the cards are skeletons and skulls. So it's got that kind of taboo or dark beauty happening here. But we have the Santa Muerte card, the death card, which is this kind of pregnant Virgin Mary depiction. And you're not getting good color, and I have so many lights for the reflection in here. But then we have the Empress card, a beautiful depiction as well. And the Seven of Cups, where I see a lot of the nostalgia and choice happening here, where again, we have the man with his back to the card, the sort of shadowy, yeah, he's here. Sorry, you guys. I will send a few to KD as we go through Capricorn season so that you guys can get a clear picture, especially at night. We're not really able to show the cards like this. But I definitely recommend this deck for that sort of dark beauty or for the season. And I always pull it out on the Day of the Dead to do a reading. So the artist for this deck, and I'll link it below, Fabio Listrani. Not sure if I'm saying that right. But yeah, it's affordable and absolutely beautiful. And the little book, I think, has Spanish and Portuguese, if I'm not mistaken, and English, which I think is awesome. So check out that tarot deck. Yeah, look at this beautiful Two of Cups.
Oh,
I know, like it's an awesome deck, and we will feature it through the dark season. Well, thanks for that presentation, Katie. I really appreciate you pulling that up. So should we move on to listing a few nativities? I already did, spoiler alert, not on purpose, but we've got Bjork.
Anne Hathaway is in the list that Katie provided us with in the backstage. And she is a personal favorite because I love everything that she does. But I want to highlight one of two particular roles that were incredibly notable in her career. Not that she wasn't good and the other ones are notable, but these two in particular were prominent too, in many ways. First, The Devil Wears Prada, which, Devil Wears Prada. We're talking about Venus and Mars here together in a way.
It totally is, because the idea of chasing designer as well, just like even wearing design, that's here. Wearing designer clothes is here. Like every Scorpio I know is a freaking brand name hoe. Like, hello everyone.
Yeah, and that hierarchical power play throughout the movie that was all around fashion and the facade of Venus, but it was actually a battleground of Mars and betrayal and all of that. So
wasn't it like there was an older woman / youth component in there as well?
Yes, that was that Miranda Priestley. She was saying everybody wants to be us, Andrea, by the end of the movie. And actually that was improvised, I think, by Meryl Streep. Amazing. And she was actually Meryl Streep, wasn't she also a Venus decan in Cancer?
She might be. I'm forgetting. Yeah.
Oh my God. So Anne Hathaway and Meryl Streep both, talking about the Venus decan here, they were involved in this movie. Miranda actually was supposed to say everybody wants to be me, but she says everybody wants to be us, to kind of show that Andy realizes that she's turning into Miranda and that Miranda sees her as an equal already and that she's like, oh shit, and this is when Andy has that realization of the Seven of Cups of being like, oh shit, what have I been chasing all this time, and then she realizes, gets out of the car and, gets her life together.
I think fashion in general, just because fashion is a Venusian thing, I know we talked about it during the Libra decans, because I see fashion is much more Libra than I do Taurus. Not that Tauruses aren't into fashion, not that all of us aren't into fashion, whatever. But I very much see it here because of the fact that, like, again, the diminishment of the bodies in high fashion, right, where you're just expected to be more and more and more skeletal in your features or something like this, and then more and more and more like glamorous and quote unquote like cutting edge. And when I think of like cutting edge, I think of like the edge of Mars, right, and like Venus being on that sort of like taboo like cutting edge. And when you think of like the glamour, and not just like the magical like glamour that you had talked about, Katie, but just the idea of you see a lot of models and things like this, like they're going to these parties and they're doing these drugs and they're all super young and they're all like thin and they're all kind of, in a way, you talk about like that casting couch like confusion of what you want, and like again that Me Too and like taking advantage and like all of these types of themes are really spun into the fashion world. So I can see that very much. Like Devil Wears Prada is perfect. Yeah.
And the second role that I see her playing that really displays, I think that was very prominent. I think she won an Oscar for it, if not just a nomination, but it was Cosette in, was it Cosette or Cosette is it, or Cosette is the name of the daughter?
In Les Miserables, in Les Miserables.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think Cosette is the daughter. Who is the girl that Anne Hathaway plays?
Don't remember the name. Not gonna get it.
Well, she plays this very sad girl that gets fired after being abused and gets more abused. And I'm sorry if I'm saying that too much, but there, I don't know, there's, you're not supposed to say it on YouTube, I suppose. But yeah, and she gets, and she excels in those parts, and she gets noticed. She becomes iconic in those particular roles, which I think it's very interesting. Yeah,
it's perfect for this. Again, it's that thing of like being, you know, that A word that you mentioned. I'm not sure if we're, I don't even know. Nobody would ever even really probably find our channel to, you know, like dox us.
There are a lot of channels that censor the word. I'm telling you.
Yeah, I know the bigger channels, they definitely do. I know people that will like blank out that AB word, or people call it AB. But anyways, just like being in that type of situation, in that downtrodden situation, that abusive situation, and then rising and finding like your power out of that is a perfect thing. And like Les Miserables, is it not like the miserable or something like this? So it's like very much again apropos for this.
There's a couple other figures too who are sort of have like a sort of fashionable vibe on this list, but one I really want to mention is Maggie Gyllenhaal, who I think is known for her role in the movie The Secretary, where she is engaged in some fetish play with her boss over having very rough sex in the office and relatively public places. So I thought that was pretty funny that she's nativity, her son is in this Decan, as well as her propensity for wearing very dark lipstick. She oftentimes is depicted wearing that very dark lipstick. There's also Owen Wilson and Ryan Gosling, Shailene Woodley, Goldie Hawn, Jamie Lee Curtis, and Jodie Foster, who are all people at some point or another who have been considered very fashionable and very in vogue.
And I want to highlight
also activists.
Yes.
Also, because Shailene Woodley, she was doing a lot of stuff out at Standing Rock when we were out there. Like she's definitely done like some B movie role. Like she definitely has that strong like empowerment like theme, and she was out there on the ground or whatever. And some of the other names you mentioned, I think, as well.
Even King Charles has a little bit of the activist streak to him, because you have that environmental cause that he's also that he's always been talking about since, you know, the early times when no one's talking about it. He was talking about it. You know, I don't like monarchists in general, but that's another issue. But I think I want to highlight Jamie Lee Curtis as having started her career in Friday the 13th, is it? Or is it Halloween? Halloween. So she was the first survivor of that genre. You know, she was the first, how do you call it? Last standing girl.
Yeah, that's right. Last standing.
Yeah, she was the first of that kind of all of those movies.
And I think it's interesting just talking about fashion in that way. And, you know, like, I think she also, I don't remember what she did, but she also did some like activist work and stuff like that. There was a bunch of these women that like took up causes and activism and things like that. But when I'm thinking of fashion, again, I'm sorry to come back to that, but we have, or like brand name, like being important or something like this for you. It very much reminds me of the name of the Seven of Cups, which is the Lord of Illusionary Success, because it's like, not that brand names don't show that we have some money or some success or something like that. But again, like clothing is just such an illusion in general, and fashion is such an illusion in general. The fact that you pay, you know, $3,000 for a belt instead of, you know, 300 or 30 or something like this. It's this illusion of success that we're trying to, you know, get in the club of, essentially, when we're wearing brand names and stuff like this.
And the more on the illusion side, you would talk. We can talk about Whoopi Goldberg also being in this list, as having a few iconic roles, such as in Ghost, where you have her interpreting a medium, someone who talks to the other side, kind of receives ghosts and spirits to intermediate communication with the living. So that's a kind of a spooky theme there of scorpionic nature. But more than that, even you have the distortion of kind of a religious figure, which is the nun in Change of Habit. That whole series, which was a big comedy hit when it came out. At least here in Brazil, people loved it.
But what was it? She also played the nun in the other one. It was where she's like singing, she leads the choir of the kids.
Yeah, that's Change of Habit, isn't it?
Is it? Is that the name?
Is it? How is it called?
Sister Act.
Sister Act?
It's called Sister Act. But I don't know.
Oh, okay, in Portuguese we changed it to Change of Habit, because do you guys also use the word habit for the clothes of the nuns?
Yes, their outfit
so
is a habit.
To me, it would make sense. I don't understand why it's different. Anyway.
Yeah. No, that's why I wanted to look. I was like, oh, okay. So yeah, Sister Act.
Sister Act. Okay, so that's the movie I was talking about. So when she does that part, she's like, Venus is responsible for priestesses and people who observe religious ritual in that way, especially priestesses and nuns and all of that. And so having her play this fake nun is this depiction of a perverted, quote unquote, Venus archetype that we were talking about as well.
She's also bringing like joy and inspiration to the downtrodden, and believing in the downtrodden. Let's say, I think this school is like, you know, like doesn't have a good budget and doesn't have a good neighborhood or something like this. And
which could be a higher expression of this energy, right? Bringing this
absolutely
renewed energy into something that has been.
Absolutely, because it's the fringes of society where you're kind of looking at that kind of taboo, and you're bringing, you know, song and dance and like showing people their ultimate potential and like believing in someone. All of those are like archetypes of the fallen Venus, or a detrimented Venus archetype. Jodie Foster also, wasn't her breakout movie like that crazy with that crazy serial killer guy in that jail?
I don't know. Silence of the Lambs. I don't know if that's her breakout role, but she was very young in that movie. Yeah, that was.
I kind of feel like that was one of her first, because that movie was huge or whatever, right? And it's this, you know, woman, like a cop or the woman FBI or something, who's like young and whatever, but she's like in prison and doing all these kind of like interacting with this very taboo character, and it's like this psychological thriller, and you know, that kind of plays with it as well. And then did we say Joe Biden? Did we say that? The president of the United States. And then we have the current president of the United States, and then Martin Scorsese, which I feel like is kind of beautiful as like a director, right? Like it's kind of like he's got this, you know, reputation as well.
He does.
Okay, so I think we're getting to the end of one more episode, one more installment in this Decanic series.
This journey.
Indeed. So you can find David at inthefirstplaceastrology.com, and you can find KD Dayton at kddayton.com. Do you guys want to mention your other handles and your Twitters and your Instas and all of that?
You guys know where to find me.
And you can find our basic info at the about section of this page. Go ahead, do a deep dive if you want to find us. Thank you all. again for being here. And please comment, like, definitely drop an emoji. The comments and the interaction are what we need. So drop a comment down below. It's been fun to do Scorpio season with y'all. I appreciate y'all being here for the Scorpio installments, and we will
And
see
even though Sagittarius is going to be gloomy enough, you guys shall see why. We are going to look forward to Capricorn.
I swear to God, Sages, we're not just blazing through your stuff so we can get to Capricorn.
Oh, don't worry. I've got plenty of Sag and Sag people around me that I will carry this if I need to.
Okay, we've got this. We've got this. No, we love you, Sagittarius. We can't wait. This Jupiter ruled Decan, and we are, now Jupiter is back in Pisces, one of its home signs. So we'll be able to cover some of the Sag Decans while we still have Jupiter in Pisces. So that will be really strong, I think.
Yes.
All right, y'all. And with this, thank you once again. Let's get to that 300. We've got a little, we're going to do a little something for you when we get there. I've noticed the subs going up, so we appreciate those of you who have subscribed thus far. And KD, do you want to ring us out with the poem?
Yes. All right. So this poem is at the end of T. Susan Chang's chapter in 36 Secrets on Scorpio 3. It's called To the Snake by Denise Levertov. Green snake, when I hung you round my neck and stroked your cold, pulsing throat, as you hissed to me, glinting, arrowy gold scales, and I felt the weight of you on my shoulders, and the whispering silver of your dryness sounded close at my ears. Green snake, I swore to my companions that certainly you were harmless, but truly, I had no certainty and no hope, only desiring to hold you for that joy which left a long wake of pleasure, as the leaves moved and you faded into the pattern of grass and shadows, and I returned, smiling and haunted, to a dark morning.
Matao kakao bersama you demikian soba da soba kena matahiba nakau di mawa demikian soba and soba ataiba nabe ujuna baikana kamaya da ongai esa koyo okoyo masena mata ibe kana sabaso inakina tabaine to you guys in by it to me tabaike